Hey guys, what's up? It's Rick. I'm back after a long time in my new shop. So I actually talked to my friend Dustin over here, ElectricianU. He's gonna come and help me set up the electrical in my new shop. So we're gonna go over kind of 5 things that you wanna think about when you're planning the electrical in your new shop, in this case, a garage. So Dustin, if we were gonna get started with a workshop and you were my electrician, what would the first thing you would want me to know coming in to be?
Well, the first thing that I would focus on is the layout. So it doesn't matter if it's even a shop layout. I always ask a customer, how are you going to use this space? So that's the first big thing. You need to figure out like where plugs need to go and how you're going to be moving things around, where you're going to be putting equipment.
So also, I would guess like if you have any sort of weird setup, like if you have like your table saw, for instance, in like the middle of the shop, how to get electric to that without a tripping hazard or things like that, right?
Yeah, because that would be good to know if you want like a cord reel, you know, instead of having extension cords plugged everywhere, if you can come from below, if you've got a basement or if you've got attic space and you can get a plug up there, cord reel is a good thing to do in the middle of a room.
Another thing that I know a lot of electricians, when I've been kind of planning for this, making sure that your breaker box has enough space to expand. So I've already looked at this breaker box. And you told me it's probably going to catch on fire, but
we've looked at everything. There's no problems that you have with this. Okay. It's just one of those things that they don't make anymore.
Okay, so when I'm looking at my breaker box, what am I looking for as far as like making sure I have enough space for 110 and 220 outlets?
Well, first thing you got to look at, which I just visually look at, is you have plenty of spaces so you can fit more breakers and more circuits in here. Another thing to consider is what your actual loads are, and an electrician is going to be the one to be able to calculate how much of this you're actually using, because you don't actually go in here and say there's a 100 amp breaker, 30 amp breaker, 20. You don't just add all of that together. There's a lot of things that you figure out whether or not this is running at a certain time with other things. And so for everything that you've got, you have more than ample. You got 200 amps here. Your service is 400 amps, so you've got really dedicated 200 amps to this space, which is kind of unique. But you always do want to consult an electrician. Don't just go out, look at your panel and be like, oh yeah, I can fit a whole bunch more breakers in there, and I think that I can put like 70 amps here. You want to get an electrician to figure that out.
Okay, so one other thing that I want to try to cover is like, what's the delineation between like, this is something I can do as a semi-handy homeowner versus this is something I definitely need to hire an electrician for?
Yeah, so just for camera's sake, I want to say here, all electrical work should be done by an electrician. That being said, a lot of states, a lot of cities, the National Electric Code is written so that the local jurisdictions, they call them an AHJ, has authority over who can do what work where. Obviously, there's a lot of places like way out in the country where there is no body that kind of oversees everything, so there's no needing to pull permits and everything. So you just got to check your area. Like in Austin, Texas, a homeowner would have to call the inspection department and say, hey, do I need to pull a permit for this kind of work? Do I need to have an electrician do it? And there are certain types of work, like if you're hanging a ceiling fan in your area, you may be able to do that kind of stuff. If you're just putting switches in, you may be able to pull like a homeowner permit, and you're allowed to do certain kinds of work. So it really just depends on your area, what your jurisdictions are okay with you doing.
Okay, so in most cases, if you ever plan on selling the house and if it's any obvious wiring, I mean, you're going to have permits pulled and professionals involved in most cases.
Yeah. And a lot of times when somebody goes to sell a house, a third-party inspector is going to go through and look at everything, and if you're up in the attic doing the work yourself and you think that you're doing all of this stuff and it looks good to you, an inspector may go behind you and be like, that is not at all code, that's not how this should have been done. So you're gonna have to pay an electrician anyways to come back and fix all the mistakes. So if you're going to be doing work on your own without an electrician, I would at least maybe try to get an electrician's opinion before you do things, and have an electrician come and look at it and make sure that everything is to code.
So when it comes to wiring a woodworking shop, what are the things to consider when looking at wiring for 110 versus 220, and I guess altogether just wiring for 110 and 220 volt outlets?
So the needs of the equipment are a lot of times going to dictate what you put in. A lot of people will look at two pieces of equipment and be like, well, this one's 220, this one's 110, which one should I do? It really just depends on, 220 is going to be a lot more efficient, it's going to use less amperage, but it uses more spaces in a panel, so that's really up to you what you want to put in. Something that I run into a lot is when people get equipment, they don't necessarily know what equipment they're going to be putting into the space, and they'll have me come out to the house and they'll say, this is what I'm going to do, and I kind of want to have like a saw thing over here, and like I might get a drill press over here. And if you don't really know and you haven't nailed down the exact kind of equipment, it really makes it difficult for us to figure out what you need where, because a lot of equipment requires specific amperage, specific voltage. So, you may have a saw that's 220 volts and it needs a 30 amp plug. Pretty rare, that'd be like a huge saw.
Yeah.
But if we were to run a 20 amp circuit with number 12 wire, that's too small of wire.
Yeah.
So you're gonna burn up that wire, you're gonna be tripping breakers all the time. So you really need to nail down exactly what your equipment is, and then having cut sheets or having some kind of specs and knowing specifically what kind of cord ends they're gonna have, because a lot of 20 amp plugs, like you have, this is a 30 amp plug, but this is just one type of 30 amp plug. So if your equipment on that cut sheet says that it comes with a different kind of 30 amp plug, you need to know that. Mm-hmm. So just for buying materials, knowing exactly what you're getting and what the exact electrical specs is a huge one.
Yeah, because we talked about all the different kinds of the 220 plugs when we were at Home Depot a minute ago, so we'll share that with everybody too. So another cool thing I see in a lot of professional shops is they'll have like all the conduit running everywhere, versus, in a residential home, you'll see mostly just like, fished outlets that are run down the wall. So in planning a shop, why would I fish wire versus run conduit?
That's a good question. So it's really a preference of what is gonna make the job easiest. Generally, bending a lot of conduit takes a lot more time, and then to hang conduit, if we're running conduit up high, it's easiest if you have two guys to do it. One guy can do it, it's just gonna take a lot more time up and down ladders and trying to like outwork being that you don't have a helper. Whereas just having one guy, if you're fishing stuff through walls, pulling stuff through attics, you can easily do that on your own. But the downside is you gotta get up in the attic, crawl around, drill all these holes and do all this attic work. So it's just kind of, you're just weighing, I guess, really what's the easiest way to do it.
Okay.
It's not gonna hurt or help anything either way. In my shop, it's a commercial building, so I've got steel framing everywhere, so it's really easy for me just to throw up conduit and re-pull and pull things. Mm-hmm. All of my panels are external to the wall, so I can just come right out of the panels and go out with conduit. So with your space, the panel's inside of the wall, so I think it'd be easier for us just to fish wires through the wall into this. Otherwise, we'd have to put J-boxes out here and kind of fish down into the panel so we have something to run conduit off, and I think it would be more of a pain in the butt to try to do that.
Okay, so a lot of times in residential applications like this, it's going to be easier just to fish, but I guess if you need a lot of versatility, like if you're upgrading and changing tools a lot, maybe having the conduit might be easier to like fish new wires, like if you are going from 110 to 220 on a tool, or if you, let's say you're going from a 20 amp 220 volt tool to a 30 amp 220 volt tool, it'll give you that versatility to be able to run a new wire easily along an existing path, as opposed to having to go up in your attic and fish a new wire.
Yeah, because if you're running a large enough diameter conduit to a piece of equipment, I mean, you could add wires to that existing conduit, so you're not just stuck with that one circuit. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you ran through the wall, you would run one piece of wire here all the way up, and you drill and put one piece of wire. So that wire's kind of just now, it's set where it is, where you'd have to add a second new wire. So things to think about. But most of the time when people are doing stuff like this, they have a very definite purpose for what they're doing. They want a saw in one area, they want a dust collector in one area, and a lot of that's not going to change. So I think doing, in a residential garage, I think doing Romex is probably the way to go instead of conduit.
Cool. Something that we talked about before you came out here was obviously shop layout, like in detail. And so that's something you definitely want to think about when you're planning to get an electrician out, or when you're just planning yourself for how you want to run electrical in your shop. Think very specifically about layout, because there's a couple things that you want to think about, like we talked about earlier, having something so that you can power your table saw in the middle of your shop without having a tripping hazard. Another thing that you may not think about is how to set up your circuits so that you can run a vacuum next to your tool, so you can run your dust collection at the same time as your tool without blowing any breakers. Another thing would be like, do you want outlets up high so you can plug your cord reels into them, so your cord reels can be up and out of the way when you're not using them. There's a lot of different little things to think about in layout when you're setting that up. Are there any things that you've run into that were maybe unique situations, or situations that you thought worked out particularly well in shops around planning for layout?
One thing that I'm currently doing with my shop is I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to be putting countertops, so that I have countertop plugs, and knowing what height I'm going to build my tables And then instead of putting everything on that one countertop in that area on one circuit, I'm giving myself multiple circuits. So like you said, if you have multiple things that you're using all at the same time, you don't want to be tripping breakers. So it's good to give yourself, like, if you have one countertop space, maybe give yourself 2 circuits. But again, you got to know what equipment you're putting in. Another thing, if you have a whole bunch of batteries, you know, like we got like 10 different batteries by 2 different companies or something, setting up a charging station somewhere is something that I'm doing in my shop. So I can plug all my batteries in overnight, and just thinking about more than just what saws and equipment am I using. Think really hard about how am I going to use this space? What are the things that I'm going to need? Because even if you have like upper cabinets that you're storing tools in, you may need a plug for something if you're going to put under cabinet lighting in that. You know, like thinking about all of that. What do I need in here? And the first thing I asked you before I even came out here is, draw me a plan. Like, have you thought about the layout? And you did. You drew everything out. And an electrician's always going to ask that if you're bringing one in. They want to know, what does the panel look like? Is there space? And what's the layout? Have you thought about where everything's going to go?
Cool. Yeah, you just made me think about something with that charging station.
Yeah, I know. There's lots of little weird things like that, you know. The cord reel, it was another idea. I didn't realize that you had a saw that you're putting in the middle. So just really, really think about where you're going to be standing. Picture it in your mind. Picture you working in the space, and everywhere you're going to need electrical something. Write that down.
Yeah. So I guess at this point, all that's left to do is get to work, right?
Let's do it.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone. Be sure to check out Dustin's channel, ElectricianU. He's also on Instagram. He does all kinds of cool stuff. And I'm Rick, Wood.Work.LIFE. If you like this video and found it useful, be sure to like it and subscribe down below. And if you have any more questions for the great master Dustin over here, be sure to, Justin. Be sure to drop those in the comments down below. Cool. Oh, and remember, keep your tools sharp. Keep your mind sharper.